Barbarian is a 2022 horror film written and directed by Zach Cregger, perhaps best known for being 1/5 of the sketch comedy troupe The Whitest Kids You Know. It stars Georgina Campbell as Tess, who arrives at her Airbnb booking to find it already occupied by Bill Skarsgård's Keith. Many are calling Barbarian the best horror film of 2022, and it is easy to see why. Cregger is clearly a big fan of horror films, using and subverting the tropes of the genre, but never forgetting that whatever he wants to say in this film, it won't be heard unless the film itself is effective at providing the necessary scares and thrills to satisfy the hardcore horror fanbase. Making the most of limited locations, Cregger flips between cinematic styles to create unique atmospheres and tones for each of the film's twisting plot threads. It also has a killer soundtrack by Anna Drubich that perfectly complements the spiraling moods of the film. If you haven't seen Barbarian, you are now entering spoiler country. Although I'm not here to give you a glorified synopsis, so I strongly recommend you watch the movie and then come straight back, because it's not like you have anything better to do. This video is going to be focusing on what I think the main themes of Barbarian are and how they are expressed by the film. And where better to start than at the end? Okay, this should be obvious. Richard Brake's Frank stalks women. He tricks his way into their homes. He kidnaps them, and although we aren't explicitly told exactly what he does, we can assume it's pretty bad.
What is wrong with you?
To Frank, women are less than human, barely even deserving of names, and his toxicity literally creates a monster, directly reflecting his attitudes, a warped caricature of maternal instinct driven only by her primal desires to nurture or kill. The mother is not the bad guy of this movie. She is a tragic victim, an innocent made dangerous by the evil that spawned her and the life she was forced into. So, to any men watching, I hope I don't need to tell you this, but the film is saying, don't be Frank. That is toxic masculinity. We meet Justin Long's AJ just as he discovers his career has been ruined by an allegation that has all the hallmarks of the Me Too movement. The film doesn't initially clue us in on whether he is guilty of the crime of which he is accused, and maybe that is intended as a litmus test of sorts for the attitudes of the viewer. It would have been easy to cast an unlikable frat bro to make AJ more obviously guilty. Instead, we are presented with Justin Long, a likable performer with neat comedic timing.
This. Oh, gross.
We are only told about the details of the crime he committed from his point of view.
I'm a persistent dude, right? I'm like fucking eye of the tiger.
Yeah,
you know? And,
right.
And she came around, and that's it. That's what happened, straight up.
Although many will clearly understand that what he is describing is absolutely sexual assault, perhaps some won't. It's Justin Long. He's nice. He's good looking. He's rich. Maybe she really did change her mind. That happens. Right? We are given hints that he is on a redemptive arc, beginning to understand the consequences of his actions.
I might be a bad person. Or maybe I'm a good person who just did a bad thing.
We all make mistakes. Right? And no. During the finale, the film finally tells us unambiguously that AJ is an absolute piece of shit, who would literally throw a woman to her death to save his own skin. These aren't mistakes, they are a pattern of behavior, an inability to see the world through any eyes other than his own, hidden behind a veneer of charm and gaslighting post hoc justifications.
I fucking panicked. I didn't even let go. You started to slip. There's nothing I could do.
The film asks you, by toying with the edges of likability and potential redemption, if you see any of this behavior in yourself, and warns you that there is no redemption for people who behave like this. So, fellas, hopefully you're 2 for 2 on this, but if you need it spelling out, the film is saying, don't be AJ. That is toxic masculinity. The first section of the film is centered entirely around Georgina Campbell's Tess and Bill Skarsgård's Keith. Over 40 minutes of this horror movie given over to a plotline that, on the face of it, has no horror at all. Despite hindsight telling us that there was no real danger, the true menace of the film lurking elsewhere. On first watch, we are acutely aware that this is a horror film, albeit one that hasn't laid its cards on the table. The tension in the opening act is palpable, and the possibility rests in our minds that the nice guy act could all be a ruse, and Keith could turn out to be the source of horror in this story. This is partly down to the casting of Skarsgård, who is best known as the monstrous Pennywise from Andy Muschietti's recent adaptation of Stephen King's It.
This isn't real enough for you, Billy.
And partly down to direction and cinematography that lend proceedings a sense of creeping dread. Tess is shown to be vulnerable, and the tone of the film tells us she is right to be wary, even if we don't know exactly why. What the film is doing here, rather than simply having a female protagonist who functions as eye candy for a male audience, is conveying the perspective of the female protagonist. What if, every time you were alone and vulnerable with a member of the opposite sex, you didn't see it as an opportunity for a Dear Penthouse letter, but instead the opening act of a potential horror story? The film ultimately makes it clear that Keith isn't a bad guy, but AJ probably didn't seem like a bad guy when Megan Maddox found herself alone with him. Frank didn't seem like a bad guy when he called to check the water supply. They then revealed themselves to be the instigators of the worst day of these women's lives. For men, that can be hard to imagine. For a woman, it is a fact of life that they are just one bad decision away from being the lead in their own personal horror film. This is not the subtext of the film. It is literally the text.
If I had been the one that checked in first and you showed up late at night...
What, you wouldn't have let me in?
Hell no, I wouldn't have let you in. Do you think I'm crazy? But if I was dumb enough to let you in, you wouldn't even think twice. You would just march on in.
Wait, you just marched on in.
Yeah, because I had to. And it was scary.
What? Do I look like some kind of monster?
Horror fans are known for nitpicking perceived plot holes, questioning whether they would have made the same decisions as the characters or whether things would have played out differently if they had been there. Something that was being satirized as long ago as Wes Craven's original Scream in 1996.
What's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
This is an attitude that Kreger uses repeatedly to make his point.
Nope.
One of the worst mistakes Tess makes in the film is running from James Butler's homeless Andre. But it isn't in the slightest unreasonable for her to fear for her safety in that context, just as it isn't unreasonable for her to be wary of Keith. When she does make what seasoned horror fans would consider mistakes, she is actually acting out of compassion for others, as opposed to leaving them to die to save her own skin, an attitude the film makes clear the audience should regard as reprehensible. By contrast, Keith is generally seen as a good guy, dealt a bad hand by the circumstances of the film. But when Tess tells Keith what she has seen in the basement, rather than simply believe her, he needs to see it for himself.
I didn't see it. Okay?
Why can't we simply believe women? How much could have been avoided here if we did? Why does Keith see the room Tess described and seemingly keep going deeper into the unknown, if not his misguided belief in his own invulnerability? When Tess puts herself in danger to save him, he refuses to believe that she knows the way out, even though she has just come from that direction.
That's the way out! That's
Wait, come.
No, please stop it! Stop it!
We have to come this way. Tess, we have to come this way.
And he is almost immediately killed for his hubris. Why do so many walk away feeling that Tess has made mistakes, but Keith acted perfectly sensibly? If not, an inherent toxic masculinity in the expectations we have of male and female characters in film in general. You could even ask, does he treat Tess as he would anyone else in this situation? If the double booking was with a man, or anyone other than an attractive young woman, does he offer to sleep on the couch, make her tea, or split a bottle of wine with her? He sees this not as an imposition, but as an opportunity. Neither Tess nor the viewer is ever under the misguided assumption that this is a romantic comedy, or the opening stanza of a dirty movie. So why is Keith? This may be hard for many male audience members to hear, because the character is ultimately well-intentioned, ultimately harmless in and of himself. But the film is very much telling you, not just don't be Frank. That should be obvious. Not just don't be AJ. The majority should also be able to see that clearly. But also, don't be Keith. Toxic masculinity isn't just the preserve of serial killers or frat bro sexual predators. It is not believing what women tell you unless you see proof with your own eyes. It is not understanding how your behavior can make women feel vulnerable, even if your intentions are, in your mind, wholesome. It is assuming you know better than women by default. It is not listening to what women have to say to you. It is instinctively seeing women not as equals, but as potential sexual conquests, even when the situation makes that inappropriate. Don't be Keith, because that too is toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity doesn't arrive in a loincloth carrying an axe. It hides in dark places behind wholesome facades. It traps us in patterns of behavior. It makes monsters of men and of women. And that will be true until we stop perpetuating these behaviors and recognize the damage that they do. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you would like to see more of this sort of content. If you enjoyed this video, please check out my other videos and hopefully you'll enjoy them too. And if you agree or disagree with anything I've said, or have any other feedback, feel free to comment below and I'll try to respond when I'm not editing or writing future videos. Thank you very much for making it all the way to the end. All of your support is very much appreciated.